Welcome back to Stooge Stream for another episode. I'm your host, the Stooge, and in this episode I have 11 Nintendo Wii hidden gems. The Nintendo Wii was a misunderstood console. It did have some great games on it, but people mostly remember it for the shovelware and waggle controls, which is fair enough because there was a ton of shovelware on it and the waggle controls sucked. But in the midst of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shovelware garbage games, there were a few hidden gems that you should probably grab, because the prices on these things are fairly cheap at the moment. So let's start with a couple of first-person shooters that weren't really well represented on the console, but a really fun one and a launch game no less was Red Steel. This is actually really well done, and if you like FPS games, it's definitely worth checking out. The control system works very well with the Wii, and you don't ever feel like at any point it's underperforming. I don't know, there was just a really fun element about this game. The story is really cool. It is a bit short though, but it sometimes can be expensive, but every now and then you can find someone slipping on it for cheap. I'd recommend picking this one up for less than $20. Next up, another one. Oh, and there's a second Red Steel game, which was different but still fun. This one also had a sequel and is also a first-person shooter in a completely different vein. This is more of your sci-fi first-person shooter, and this is the Conduit by Sega. Again, another game which is lots of fun, really underrated and forgotten in the grand scheme of things. I don't really hear anyone talking about it. When people do, they complain about it a little bit. The controls aren't perfect, but the gameplay is fun, and it's a cheap game, well worth getting. The Conduit 1 and 2 are available on the Wii. Next up, for years people have been complaining that they want a Pokemon-style game for the console, like a full, fleshed-out world Pokemon game. Well, we had one on the Wii, you just didn't realize it. It was called Spectrobe's Origins. There was 2 of these as well on the DS. And they are great games. They're very much in the style of Pokemon, but different in their own right as well. If you like those monster training games, you'll probably really like this. Not an expensive game either, really easy to come across, very much worth getting. There was some great rail shooters on the Wii. The Wii did that fantastically, so here's a couple that are very cheap, very easy to get. This is a more mature one, which is House of the Dead Overkill. This went for a much more mature setting. There's a lot of swearies in this and a lot more violence. But it is a really good game if you like rail shooters. Rail shooter meaning you don't have control over the camera, it's fixed in place. You know, like the gun games on arcade. Speaking of, 2 arcade conversions, House of the Dead 2 and 3 returns. Again, rail shooter, lots of fun. If you like rail shooters, you can't miss with any of the House of the Dead series, and 2 and 3 returns or Overkill on the Wii are always a lot of fun, great with friends as well. Another arcade conversion, and this was well past when it originally came out. I can't remember when this first came out, but this coming to the Wii, it was like, really? I remember that from arcades from years ago. But it is a lot of fun, and this is another one you can get for very cheap, and it's Ghost Squad. Multiple paths you can take, stuff you can unlock. Lots of replay value, lots of fun with friends. Ghost Squad is definitely worth throwing on the list if you like a rail shooter. Do you like board games? Now that's an awkward question to ask, because you know the old Mario Party style of games. Well, there was a different game like that, but it was more the board game style. It's like if Monopoly met Square Enix and Nintendo properties all at once. And it's called Boom Street over here in the PAL territories, and Fortune Street, I believe, in the NTSC territories. You have a mixture of characters from the Nintendo universe and the Dragon Quest universe playing board games together with board game rules, and it's very much like Monopoly. You've got to take over areas and build them up and make money and resources, but it's a lot more complex, and I'm very much underselling it. But if you like board games, I guess, or you're a fan of the Dragon Quest or Nintendo franchises and you just want to see them in a different setting, this is a weird, quirky one that's well worth getting, and a great multiplayer game as well. Now, there weren't a huge amount of platformers on the Wii. There were a few. There's your obligatory Mario platformers and Donkey Kong Country Returns and a few other bits and pieces, but there weren't a massive ton of them. There was one that stood out of the pack and is really fun and really well done and kind of uses the waggle controls well enough that you don't mind it. And that's Wario Land: The Shake Dimension. Another game in the Wario Land series of games. Very much a traditional style platformer. It looks really nice. It plays quite smoothly. It's a lot of fun, and Wario is a greedy bastard that wants to shake the money out of everything. Well worth checking out. If you like platformers and you like Nintendo platformers, and the Wario games are fantastic, you know that from the Game Boy era, but this one kind of gets forgotten, the Wii one. There's one on GameCube as well. There were a few RPGs on the Wii, not a huge amount, but there was another one again that I feel is kind of forgotten, and it's quite cheap because of that, and it's a great entry in the series, and even the waggle controls you have to use in it aren't too bad. You get the hang of it pretty quickly, and you get kind of used to it, and then it kind of keeps you interested in the combat sequences as well. And that's Dragon Quest Swords. So another game by Square Enix in the Dragon Quest series, but it's on the Wii, and the sword mechanic that you use isn't too bad. It's actually quite playable, and even though you waggle that thing, it works. And you kind of, if you like RPGs and you like Dragon Quest games, and this is definitely one that you should have on your list, because it's not expensive. Like, you know, paying $20 odd for a decent length RPG isn't too bad. This is another game in the adult sort of games on the Wii, which there weren't a huge amount of. House of the Dead Overkill being one of them, and Madworld being another one. Another game by Sega. They went very much for the MA rating. This is a game that's stylistically in black and white and red. Red being the color of the blood you spill. That's the only time you see it, and you will see a lot of red in this game. You have very interesting ways of murdering people in this game. That's the only way you can really describe it. You've got a chainsaw, you can throw people on spikes, you can do all sorts of things. It's in the vein of a 3D beat 'em up. The black and white at times can be a little bit annoying because colors blend in together and it's hard to tell what some things are, but you get used to it very quickly. It is a stylistic choice. But the fact that you've got an adult beat 'em up on the Wii is fantastic. This is another one that's very cheap because it didn't sell very well and there's a lot of copies out there. But it is a lot of fun, and the waggle controls again do kind of work fairly well for it. So keep your eyes out for Madworld. And finally, this is definitely the hiddenest gems of hiddenest gems on the console. This, and I believe it's also on the DS. The DS version is fairly similar, but very much scaled down, as you can imagine. And another great game, but this is fantastic, and you really should add this to your collection, and that is Batman the Brave and the Bold, the video game. Based off the animated series, this is a side-scrolling platform beat-em-up, mostly in the beat-em-up with a touch of platforming here and there. You unlock a whole bunch of characters from the DC universe, and you go around and beat the crap out of the bad guys as Batman and X-character, being Aquaman, Plastic Man, Blue Beetle, Green Lantern. There's so many characters in this. It's awesome. And it is so much fun. It is a great, fun beat-em-up. It's got a great sense of humor about it because the show was a parody of the 70s era of Batman. So, Diedrich Bader, who plays Batman in the series, is fantastic. There's some great humor, some great jokes in it, some great voice acting, and just an overall great game. If you had to only pick one game out of this lot, as weird as it sounds, it'd be Batman the Brave and the Bold, the video game. And then very close behind it, you'd be looking at Madworld and Dragon Quest, Boom Street and Warrior Land right behind them. And then the shooters and stuff are just shooters, but they're a lot of fun too. So what are your hidden gems on the Wii? Let me know in the comments below. I always like to find out games that I don't know about, and we can discuss them and do things like that. That's always fun. Until next time though, don't forget, adventure, excitement. Stooge craves not these things. Welcome to the Stooge Revolution.